Hello and welcome to MBKM Models. Please don't forget to like, share, subscribe and follow for more great aircraft documentaries and model build videos. Whilst Eva Braun was enjoying all the trappings of National Socialist wealth, millions of Jews, gypsies, homosexuals and communists were murdered by the brutal regime that she sat at the top of. With that said, let's have a look at Eva Braun, the SS photographic office girl who met a brutal end because, against her parents' advice, she flew too near the sun. Eva Anna Paula Braun, 6th of February 1912 to the 30th of April 1945, was a German photographer who was the longtime companion and briefly the wife of Adolf Hitler. Braun met Hitler in Munich when she was a 17-year-old assistant and model for his personal photographer Heinrich Hoffmann. She began seeing Hitler often about 2 years later. Braun attempted suicide twice during their early relationship. By 1936, Braun was part of Hitler's household at the Burghoff near Berchtesgaden, Bavaria, Germany, and lived a sheltered life throughout World War II. She became a significant figure within Hitler's inner social circle, but did not attend public events with him until mid-1944, when her sister Gretel married Hermann Fegelein, the SS liaison officer on his staff. As Nazi Germany was collapsing towards the end of the war, Braun swore loyalty to Hitler and went to Berlin to be by his side in the heavily reinforced Führer bunker beneath the Right Chancellery Garden. As Red Army troops fought their way into the centre government district on the 29th of April 1945, Braun married Hitler during a brief civil ceremony. She was 33 and he was 56. Less than 48 hours later, they died by suicide in a sitting room of the bunker. Braun by biting and swallowing a capsule of cyanide, and Hitler by a gunshot to the head. The German public was unaware of Braun's relationship with Hitler until after their deaths. Many of the surviving colour photographs and films of Hitler were taken by Braun. Eva Braun was born in Munich and was the second daughter of school teacher Friedrich Fritz Braun, 1879 to 1964, and Franziska Fanny Kronberger, 1885 to 1976. Her mother had worked as a seamstress before her marriage. She had an elder sister, Ilse, 1909 to 1979, and a younger sister, Gretel, 1915 to 1987. Her father was a Lutheran and her mother a Catholic. Braun's parents were divorced in April 1921 but remarried in November 1922, probably for financial reasons as hyperinflation was plaguing the German economy at the time. Braun was educated at a Catholic lyceum in Munich and then for 1 year at a business school in the convent of the English Sisters in Simbach am Inn, where she had average grades and a talent for athletics. At 17, Braun took a job working for Heinrich Hoffmann, the official photographer for the Nazi Party. Initially employed as a shop assistant and sales clerk, she soon learned how to use a camera and develop photographs. She met Adolf Hitler, 23 years her senior, at Hoffmann's studio in Munich in October 1929. He had been introduced to her as Herr Wolf. Braun's younger sister Gretel also worked for Hoffmann from 1932 onward. The women rented an apartment together for a time. Gretel often accompanied Eva on her subsequent trips with Hitler to Ober-Salzberg. Hitler lived with his half-knee scaly rabble in an apartment at Prinzregentenplatz 16 in Munich from 1929 until her death in 1931. On the 18th of September of that year, Rabel was found dead in the apartment with a gunshot wound to the chest, an apparent suicide with Hitler's pistol. Hitler was in Nuremberg at the time. His relationship with Rabel, likely the most intense of his life, had been important to him. Hitler began seeing more of Braun after Rabel's suicide. Braun herself attempted suicide on the 10th or 11th of August 1932 by shooting herself in the chest with her father's pistol. Historians feel the attempt was not serious but was a bid for Hitler's attention. After Braun's recovery, Hitler became more committed to her and by the end of 1932 they had become lovers. She often stayed overnight at his Munich apartment when he was in town. Beginning in 1933, Braun worked as a photographer for Hoffmann. This position enabled enabled her to travel accompanied by Hoffmann, with Hitler's entourage as a photographer for the Nazi Party. Later in her career, she worked for Hoffmann's art press. According to a fragment of her diary and the account of biographer Nerin Gunn, Braun's second suicide attempt occurred in May 1935. She took an overdose of sleeping pills when Hitler failed to make time for her in his life. Hitler provided Braun and her sister with a 3-bedroom apartment in Munich that August, and the next year the sisters were provided with a villa in Bogenhausen at Wasserburger Straße 12, now Delpstraße 12. By 1936, Braun was at Hitler's household at the Burghoff near Berchtesgaden whenever he was in residence there, but she lived mostly in Munich. Braun also had her own apartment at the new Reich Chancery in Berlin, completed to a design by Albert Speer. Braun was a member of Hoffmann's staff when she attended the Nuremberg rally for the first time in 1935. Hitler's half-sister Angela Rabel, Gailey's mother, took exception to her presence there and was later dismissed from her position as housekeeper at the Burghoff. Researchers are unable to ascertain if her dislike for Braun was the only reason for her departure, but other members of Hitler's entourage saw Braun as untouchable from then on. Hitler wished to present himself in the image of a chaste hero in the Nazi ideology. Men were the political leaders and warriors, and women were the homemakers. Hitler believed that he was sexually attractive to women and wished to exploit this for political gain by remaining single, as he felt marriage would decrease his appeal. He and Braun never appeared as a couple in public. The only time they appeared together in a published news photo was when she sat near him at the 1936 Winter Olympics. The German people were unaware of Braun's relationship with Hitler until after the war. Braun had her own room adjoining Hitler's at both the Burghoff and the Führerbunker complex beneath the Reich Chancery Garden in Berlin. Biographer Heike Gortmaker wrote that women did not play a big role in the politics of Nazi Germany. Braun's political influence on Hitler was minimal. She was never allowed to stay in the room when business or political conversations took place and was sent out of the room when cabinet ministers or other dignitaries were present. She was not a member of the Nazi Party. In his post-war memoirs, Hoffmann characterized Braun's outlook as inconsequential and feather-brained. Her main interests were sports, clothes, and the cinema. She led a sheltered and privileged existence and seemed uninterested in politics. One instance when she took an interest was in 1943, shortly after Germany had fully transitioned to a total war economy. Among other things, this meant a potential ban on women's cosmetics and luxuries. According to Speer's memoirs, Braun approached Hitler in high indignation. Hitler quietly instructed Speer, who was armaments minister at the time, to halt production of women's cosmetics and luxuries rather than instituting an outright ban. Speer later said Eva Braun will prove a great disappointment to historians. Braun continued to work for Hoffmann after commencing her relationship with Hitler. She took many photographs and films of members of Hitler's inner circle, some of which were sold to Hoffmann for extremely high prices. She received money from Hoffmann's company as late as 1943. Braun also held the position of private secretary to Hitler. This guise meant she could enter and leave the chancellery unremarked, though she used a side entrance and a rear staircase. Gortmacher notes that Braun and Hitler enjoyed a normal sex life. Braun's friends and relatives described Eva giggling over a 1938 photograph of Neville Chamberlain sitting on a sofa in Hitler's Munich flat, with the remark, "If only he knew what goings on that sofa has seen." On the 3rd of June 1944, Braun's sister Gretel married SS Gruppenführer Hermann Fagerlein, who served as a Reichsführer SS Heinrich Himmler's liaison officer on Hitler's staff. Hitler used the marriage as an excuse to allow Braun to appear at official functions, as she could then be introduced as Fagerlein's sister-in-law. When Fagerlein was caught in the closing days of the war trying to escape to Sweden or Switzerland, Hitler ordered his execution. He was shot for desertion in the garden of the Reich Chancery on the 28th of April 1945. When Hitler purchased the Burghoff in 1933, it was a small holiday home on the mountain at Obersalzberg. Renovations began in 1934 and were completed by 1936. A large wing was added onto the original house and several additional buildings were constructed. The entire area was fenced off and the remaining houses on the mountain were purchased by the Nazi Party and demolished. Braun and other members of the entourage were cut off from the outside world when in residence. residents. Speer, Hermann Göring and Martin Bormann had houses constructed inside the compound. Hitler's valet, Heinz Ling, stated in his memoirs that Hitler and Braun had 2 bedrooms and 2 bathrooms, with interconnecting doors at the Burghoff, and Hitler would end most evenings alone with her in his study before they retired to bed. She would wear a dressing gown or housecoat and drink wine. Hitler would have tea. Public displays of affection or physical contact were non-existent, even in the enclosed world of the Burghoff. Braun took the role of hostess amongst the regular visitors, though she was not involved in running the household. She regularly invited friends and family members to accompany her during her stays, the only guest to do so. When Henrietta von Schirach suggested that Braun should go into hiding after the war, Braun replied, "Do you think I would let him die alone? I will stay with him up until the last moment." Hitler named Braun in his will to receive 12,000 Reichsmarks yearly after his death. He was very fond of her and worried when she participated in sports or was late returning for tea. Braun was very fond of Negus and Stasi, her 2 Scottish Terrier dogs, and they appear in her home movies. She usually kept them away from Hitler's German Shepherd Blondie. Blondie was killed by one of Hitler's entourage on the 29th of April 1945, when he ordered that one of the cyanide capsules obtained for Braun and Hitler's suicide the next day be tested on the dog. Braun's dogs and Blondie's puppies were shot on the 30th of April by Hitler's dog handler Fritz Tornoff. In early April 1945, Braun travelled from Munich to Berlin to be with Hitler at the Führer bunker. She refused to leave as the Red Army closed in on the capital. After midnight on the 28th to the 29th of April, Hitler and Braun were married in a small civil ceremony within the bunker. The event was witnessed by Joseph Goebbels and Martin Bormann. Thereafter, Hitler hosted a modest wedding breakfast with his new wife. When Braun married Hitler, her legal name changed to Eva Hitler. When she signed her marriage certificate, she wrote the letter B for her family name, then crossed this out and replaced it with Hitler. After 1 p.m. on the 30th of April 1945, Braun and Hitler said their farewells to staff and members of the inner circle. Later that afternoon, at approximately 3:30 p.m, several people reported hearing a loud gunshot. After waiting a few minutes, Ling, accompanied by Hitler's SS adjutant Otto Gunsch, entered the small study and found the lifeless bodies of Hitler and Braun on a small sofa. Braun had bitten into a cyanide capsule and Hitler had shot himself in the right temple with his pistol. The corpses were carried upstairs and through the bunker's emergency exit to the garden behind the right chancery, where they were burned during the Red Army's shelling in and around the area. Braun was 33 years old when she died and Adolf Hitler was 56. By the 11th of May, Hitler's dentists, assistants, Kate Hausermann and dental technician Fritz Ekman identified dental remains as belonging to Hitler and Braun. The remains of Joseph and Magda Goebbels, the 6 Goebbels children, General Hans Krebs and Hitler's dogs were repeatedly buried and exhumed, with the last location being the Smersch compound in Magdeburg, East Germany. Hitler and Braun's remains were alleged to have been moved as well, but this is most likely Soviet disinformation. There is no evidence that any bodily remains of Hitler or Braun, with the exception of the dental remains, were found by the Soviets. On the 4th of April 1970, a Soviet KGB team with detailed burial charts secretly exhumed 5 wooden boxes of remains in Magdeburg. The remains were thoroughly burned and crushed, after which the ashes were thrown into the Biederitz River, a tributary of the nearby Elbe. The rest of Braun's family survived the war. Her mother, Franziska, died at age 91 in January 1976, having lived out her days in an old farmhouse in Ruppolding, Bavaria. Her father, Fritz, died in 1964. Gretel gave birth to a daughter who she named Eva on the 5th of May 1945. She later married Kurt Burghoff, a businessman. She died in 1987. Braun's elder sister, Ilse, was not part of Hitler's inner circle. She married twice and died in 1979. Thanks for watching, thanks for listening, and until next time.